All right, I'm back. We're going to look at external secondary data in this video. Specifically, we're going to take a look at the kind of secondary data that's not existing in a company's own databases. So they've got to go out of their way to get that data. That's external secondary data. So there are various sources of external secondary data out there. These include, of most, I guess, first thing that comes to mind is the government. You don't normally think about the government as a great source of data, but it has become. In fact, in this linked TED.com presentation by Tim Berners-Lee, Tim Berners-Lee talked about the explosion of data from governments, how governments around the world have opened up their platforms, have shared their data with the world in ways that has never been seen before. If you now go onto a website like data.gov, you can find all the wonderful data sets made available by the US government. Let's take a look at a few of them. So data.gov includes data from the US government. At this point, there are more than 300,000 data sets available. Not 300,000 rows of data, but 300,000 different kinds of data sets. Now, granted, not all of these data sets are germane to marketing or even business. But even if a small percentage of these 300,000 plus data sets are relevant to business, it would be well worth our while to take a look at them. Most importantly, all these are free. Let's take a look at one possible example. I'll search for complaint. I guess one way of assessing if people are happy or not is looking at complaints. So is there a data set of consumer complaints, for example? Here we have consumer complaints. So here we have a data set of do not call reported calls data, and a lot of them actually, a lot of copies of them. And here we have a, okay. So say consumer complaint or review. And we might, nothing came up here for consumer review. So I haven't had so much luck out here looking for a customer data set under data.gov, but I'm sure it's also probably because I haven't looked hard enough. Let me not spend so much time looking at the data.gov site because there are many other gov sites with data available. In fact, if you want to find any data set about government data, all you've got to do is Google for open and the name of the city or state. Let me try Open New York. Doing so takes me to two possible links. One of them is for openny.gov, which is the, I believe, the New York State Open Data Sets platform. Here we have it. Here they've shared all sorts of data about the open data available from the New York State platform. And of course, you could be doing something like Open France and find out about data shared by the French government as well. Here we have it. It's all in French though. Here we have it in English. Let's go on to look at Open NYC or New York City. So here we have, let's say Open Data maybe. Here we have the NYC Open Data platform, which has a lot of data, open data available about New York City. Here we can learn about, for example, let's see, parking ticket. Now I've searched for that before. So here we have an interesting data set of all the parking violations ever issued in the year 2014 and so on. They even have parking violations for 2022. And let's take a look at this data here. So with a few clicks, I have now arrived at a data set containing all the different parking tickets ever issued in New York City, including the kind of car, the location of the ticket, and so on. If you were ever interested in finding out when is it that parking tickets are issued, you can find that out from this, because we have here the timestamp for every single ticket. If you're ever curious about whether certain cars are more likely to be victimized by the police ticketing, for example, are red cars more likely to get ticketed? Well, you can do that here. So there are a number of examples out here of interesting data sets that might be relevant to a problem you're looking at. Here's another one that I'd like looking at. So here is the restaurant inspection results data set. Navigate over to there, and here we have data on the NYC restaurant inspection results. We have data on the various restaurants and how the Department of Health rated these restaurants, whether they were rated poorly or well, if they had any violations, if somebody found flies in the food, and so on and so forth. Okay, I'm hoping I've convinced you of all the different data sets available from the government. And these are not even, I haven't even looked at all the data sets available. You can also look at, for example, the US Census. So let's take a look at that actually. So here's the US Census data. And here we can learn more about, again, the data gathered every 10 years as part of the US decennial census. You can also learn about other data used to supplement the US Census data, like the ACS data. The American Community Survey, or ACS data set, is used to supplement the 10-year survey or census study done by the United States, which also includes data beyond demographics. Actually, I'm sorry, it only includes demographics, my bad. Okay. So you can go in here and you can look for a certain zip code and learn about a specific zip code and their demographics for that zip code. Okay. So the beauty about all this external secondary data is that I've just shared with you, all this is pretty much free data. There are, of course, many other sources of secondary data available, many publicly available data sets. You can do a search for public data sets on Google Cloud that lists all the publicly available data sets out there. And by public, I mean it's an euphemism for free. We've seen that many of the large web companies have freed up their data as well. Sometimes for huge, it's just helped the world in many different ways. So there are sites like their platforms like Google Trends, Google Ngram, Google Public Data Explorer, and so on, that highlight all the wonderful data made available by Google for us to learn about various things. There's a book, I'm trying to remember the name of it now off the top of my head. I can't remember the name. I got it finally. It's called Why People Lie, I believe, by Seth Davidson. I'm not going to remember his whole name, but bottom line, what he found out in his book, or what he talked about in his book, is that what people are asked in a survey is often not, or what people answer in a survey, even though anonymous, is often not truthful. Of course, what people say in person is most of the time not truthful, according to him. But what is a perfect test of what he called the truth serum is what people Google. For instance, in one of his studies, he was able to predict how somebody was going to vote based on how they Googled for the presidential candidates. According to Seth, if somebody Googles Trump, Hillary versus Hillary, Trump, I'm sorry, if they Googled Trump, Clinton, use last names here, versus Clinton Trump, the one Googling Trump Clinton is probably a Trump supporter because they put the word Trump in front of Clinton, right? So his argument was that you can learn a lot about people's true feelings by gathering this wonderful data that people are searching for. Now, that data is freely shared by Google. If you simply Google for Google Trends, you'll be able to see all the wonderful data shared by Google Trends. Here, if I were to type in a word like, a keyword like, let's get away from politics here, and I'll type in something that, let's say Nike. Let's see, we want to figure out searches for Nike. As I type in the keyword Nike, it pulls up a couple of options for me, including the search term, which is a literal search for this phrase, or we have here Nike footwear manufacturing company. One thing that Google will do automatically for us is it will aggregate some of the results. If somebody searches for Nike shoes, it will be categorized and grouped into the keyword phrase Nike footwear manufacturing company. The Nike footwear manufacturing company would also have maybe searches for Nike Jordans, maybe Nike misspelled, if that's even possible to misspell it, and so on. So I'm going to click on here, the handiwork by Google, by clicking on Nike footwear manufacturing company to learn more about the search trends for this iconic US sporting goods company. Now, this line graph shows us the trend of searches for Nike over the last 3 months by default, or 1 year by default. 1 year by default. We can go beyond this. We can specify a specific range, like let's just say, let's look at the period from 2004 to today. As you look at this, you can learn more about trends for the searches. Let me go with the shorter range, a more specific range. Let's go with range from, let's say, January 1st, 2016 to Jan 1st, 2022. Or maybe it's in the year of 12/31/21. We have now, with this, 5 years of data. Or is it 6? 6 years of data, actually. Okay, so as you look at this, you can see that people are searching more certain times, less certain times. You can look through and see if there are any patterns here, any consistent patterns. Are there peaks that are kind of repeating themselves, representing some sort of a periodic pattern in the data? Nothing jumps out at me here from looking at this. Now, the reason we care about this is what this can tell us now. Again, bear in mind, with secondary data, it doesn't come with answers. It comes close to the answer. This in itself doesn't tell us that people are liking Nike more in December 2019 than in November, but they're searching more for it. It requires a bit of a stretch then, extrapolation, if you will, to assume that if somebody is searching for Nike shoes, they're probably interested in it. It is a stretch because somebody might be Googling for Nike for all sorts of reasons other than, or that, a liking for the pair of shoes or Nike apparel may not be the only reason to Google for Nike. One may do that because they heard of a labor problem of Nike, or they're doing a report on exploitation of workers by Nike in Vietnam. Okay, so there may be all sorts of reasons to Google for Nike. Some of them may not even be positive. That being said, one could surmise that these peaks reflect an interest that is higher in December typically than most other months of the year, which might lead one to believe that people in the month of December are thinking about a lot about Nike. Maybe that's when people are buying a lot of Nike products, possibly. It's a stretch, it's a guess. And that's the thing about secondary data. Let's try another one out here. Let's try chocolate. This time, I'll just leave it open. I won't even specify a company, but I don't want it to include hot chocolate or the cacao tree. So I'm going to select here chocolate confectionery products, which is going to group or bin all chocolate products into that one keyword phrase. Now here I have the last 5 years or 6 years of data for chocolate searches. I'm sure you've got a theory about when people search for chocolate. People may search for chocolate when they're thinking about it, when they're thinking about buying it. And that you may be wondering, and I'm sure you guessed, and you guessed it correctly or not. Valentine's Day is not the most popular period to buy chocolates. It is the second most popular month to buy chocolates in. The most popular time for chocolates, at least for searches, is December. Now, you can, of course, also download this data as a CSV file, and then you can find out, for example, the average search volume for any given month over a span of time to iron out some fluctuations that might happen from one year to another because of, once in 100 years type, episodes that do happen. Okay, so that's something you can do with search data. It's a nice way you can kind of, again, learn a lot about what people are thinking about and what people are doing, what's in their mind. And again, the beauty of this thing is this is free data. Before I move on, you may have noticed that this data here you're looking at on the graph doesn't actually give you the true search volume. Rather, it provides us an index. An index that ranges from 0 to 100. In fact, that's exactly what it's intended to do, give us an index. Google will not tell us the actual amount of searches done. Rather, it'll give us an index from 0 to 100, where 100 indicates the maximum amount for that given period of time. Because it is an index, you have to bear in mind that if you were to change this range to, let's say, 2010 to 2021, the numbers you see on the graph are going to change because they're tied to the range of data we're exploring. Any given range is bound to have at least, if not both, 0 and 100 in it. So bear in mind, if you're looking for searches that the search is sensitive to the time range, a second factor to consider is that when you look up Google Trends, Google doesn't look up the entire population of searches. Rather, it looks at a sample of searches so that it can generate results for us quick enough. Turns out those numbers are pretty close enough because the samples are randomly drawn. But it's possible that if in one run you find out that December 2016 for chocolates is 82, in another one you might find out it's 81 or 84. There's going to be a little bit of kind of noise around that number. It's not going to be always exactly the same because, again, it's working off of a sample. That's a lot about the power of Google Trends. Let's take a look at another Google tool that has similar powers. This is one that you may not have heard of, but a couple of years ago, more like 15, 20 years ago, Google took it upon themselves to go and scan all the books in some major libraries in America, and then convert all the words in the books to digital form. So now pretty much every single word in pretty much every English book and that of many other languages is available in digital form to Google. No, Google is not about to violate copyright by sharing the books with people and making them free. Google's goal here is to use that information or make it publicly available so others can look through and learn a lot about what people are writing in books. Now, in a famous study from many years ago, the authors found out that the word happiness was going up and down over time. Not finding this nice peak I was looking for. See sadness out here. And what the authors found out was that by looking at keywords like sadness, happiness, and so on in books, they were able to learn about a lot of periods in American history when people were experiencing happiness or sadness and how they're feeling. They could learn a lot about how people were feeling based on what books were, based on the words in books. The thinking is as follows. If people are happy or unhappy, authors may reflect that feeling. Maybe not in a biology textbook, but in a best-selling novel. So in a sense, the emotions expressed by people during a certain period are going to be brought out in books. You can also learn a lot about cultural trends from looking at the words employed by authors in books. Certain words may have been more popular then, less popular now. Certain subjects, computational biology, what is that? Well, we know what it is now, but back then, in 1980, it was nothing. You never saw this mentioned in any book, anywhere at all. But now you see it mentioned a lot, right? In fact, it's seen as heydays. So, a very small fraction of searches or of all words, match computational biology. That being said, you're seeing sort of like a drop since then for computational biology. What about data science? By the way, the phrase data science contains two words, hence that is 1 and 2 grams. And that's the thinking behind the phrase n-gram, right? So gram simply refers to number of phrases in a keyword. For data science, on the other hand, mentions are only growing over time. In 2019, it hit its highest number thus far of mentions. So certain domains are growing while others are not growing at such a rapid pace. Let's try another one called neural networks. Let's love this one. We're seeing neural networks seeing a peak right around 95 when they're very popular, and then they failed to deliver, and so mentions of them in books dropped rapidly until deep learning came into its own, which is derived loosely off of neural networks. And so you're seeing an uptick in searches for or mentions of neural networks now. So hopefully you're convinced that there are a number of sources of open data available that can be used for doing research. There's also, of course, many, the list is long. You can pull data from all sorts of companies, all sorts of platforms. Now, of late, Instagram and Facebook have put more kind of guards and protection on their API. But you can gather as much. Twitter is very generous in sharing their, or at least as of this recording this video, very generous in sharing their data with the public. There's many other APIs from which you can pull data quite easily. Now, in addition to free sources of data, there are, of course, many other associations and general guides where you can get data from. There's, companies like Moody's, S&P's, Syndicated.com. There's sources of international data from US government sources, from non-government sources, and from foreign government sources. So there are a number of sources of data that are out there, but these now we're looking at involve payment. They're no longer free sources of data like government data sources or Google data or Twitter data. Okay. The term used for such standardized marketing information services is syndicated data. There are companies that make it their business to gather large amounts of data for the sole purpose of resale. They're hoping to make money by selling the data they gather. This may be at the household level or firm level, therefore household/consumers level or institutional level. It may be based on surveys or based on consumer panels. A consumer panel is one where people are asked to track what they do over a long span of time. For example, people might be told to track information about what they have been buying at grocery stores. Every time they make a trip to a grocery store, they'd be asked to barcode scan all the items they purchased and upload that to a website. This is exactly what Nielsen's purchase panel has their um, members do. Okay, so from these syndicated data sources, we have a lot of data available to us. And I'm going to go over each one of these in some detail in another video. For now, please know you can gather a lot of customer profile data from Clarity 360 or from a nice website called Social Explorer that blends in US Census data, psychographic data, and geography into a beautiful visual so you can see in a sense where do people of a certain kind live. Statista is a great resource for fairly comprehensive, well-written, well-procured reports on all things business, all things consumer in particular. So let's say you're curious about carbonated beverage consumption in the United States. You can look up Statista database for that and find a fairly comprehensive report on what is the market share for Diet Coke, let's say, and how many cans are sold in 1 year in Argentina, let's say. Furthermore, there are purchase panels out there like those of Nielsen and PD. There are also purchase panels. There are also media panels. For example, Nielsen tracks what people are watching on TV. Arbitron, now part of Nielsen, tracks what people are listening to on the radio. There are panels tracking what people are listening to on Spotify and so on. Spotify themselves, of course, are gathering a lot of data on what people are listening to on their platform. Furthermore, there are companies like Simmons Insight that conduct fairly comprehensive surveys of demographics and psychographics and behavioral data. Remember, the US Census is limited to just demographic. Simmons will go down to psychographic and behavioral and so on. So it's very germane to then marketing researchers. Again, more about that in a later session. We'll go over every one of these examples in more detail. Okay, so those are some options available to explore. Okay. To wrap it up then, we have looked at the power of secondary data, both internal and external, to unlock a lot of information that can inform consumer decisions. But of course, having so much data available is not all good. There's a dark side to it, and many folks are opposed to the fact that there's way too much information being gathered by companies and are calling for controls on companies, reckless behavior and abuse of consumer data. That's an important kind of side to bear in mind. There's a nice clip on 16 Minutes that talk more about companies abusing the data they're gathering and misusing the data that they have made available. And whenever that does happen, at some point in time, people gather together and they say, we want more controls, and something new like GDPR comes about that places limitations and restrictions on what companies can do with consumer data. This is one of those debates that's raged for as long as I can remember, where companies want to have more data on consumers so they can better serve them, while consumers are concerned about companies abusing their personal information. And so in the US, the view is the two must figure out a good balance point. The government would rather not impose laws and limitations on data gathering unless things get out of hand, like they did with the do not call lists. In conclusion, we have contrasted here primary and secondary data, evaluated criteria for secondary data, examined sources of internal and and external secondary data, and also examine some sources of syndicated data sources.